WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM's Master of Business Administration is designed to accommodate the career needs of professionals across a variety of work organizations. More information at business.udmercy.edu.
The Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham, and this week on The Metro, we're joined by Robin Vincent of Chalkbeat Detroit. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Tia, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be in the studio here at WDET. Today on the program, Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential campaign has been heating up. But who is Kamala Harris, and what image is she trying to sell to voters? We'll hear about those answers later in the hour.
But first, our democracy is never guaranteed. Democrats have been fond of saying that democracy is on the ballot this presidential election. The truth is, democracy is always up for grabs. Democracy by its nature is fragile. It relies on flawed humans tasked with playing by an agreed-upon set of rules. It relies on people holding each other accountable. Recently, there have been a lot of attacks on our democracy. Since 2020, threats of violence against county clerks have increased. That same year, there was an attempted insurrection led by then-President Donald Trump followers to overturn the presidential election results. Conservatives have continued to attack voting rights. The Republican National Committee has said that it's currently involved in at least 78 election-related lawsuits in 23 states. Essentially, the group is trying to raise doubts about the integrity of our electoral system before ballots are even cast. Abby Vasulis, a national politics reporter for Mother Jones magazine, has been writing about this issue, and she's here now to discuss it. Abby, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
What are these lawsuits being put forth by the Republican National Committee claiming? What broadly are they challenging, and which states are they targeting?
So there's a couple different buckets of claims that the RNC is raising in more than a dozen states. In Michigan, they seem to be focused on the voter rolls, so lists of eligible voters. And in Michigan, they're recycling this old, already debunked claim that there are dead people on Michigan's voter rolls.
And based on your reporting, are you seeing any proof from that side that they're showing right now in order to say that these things are happening?
No, really, they're just copy and pasting the same arguments that have already been dismissed. In 2020, there was a different group, a single issue group called the Public Interest Legal Foundation, and they launched a lawsuit saying that Michigan had tons of dead voters on their voter rolls. And eventually, in March, that lawsuit was dismissed. But then just a couple days later, the RNC filed their very similar lawsuit, not bringing forth any significant proof that there are dead voters on the rolls. In fact, they're using math that doesn't really make sense, including in their potential list of dead voters, names that are inactive on voter rolls. So they have not been able to allege a single name that is on the voter roll that should not be.
And how do we know that these claims, once again, are legitimate claims? Or are we seeing these as something that they really want to go through with?
I mean, they're filing the lawsuits in court, and so that shows that they are serious about the allegations they're making. But it's not clear that they actually are trying to change election rules or that they actually believe that there are dead voters on the voter rolls. Because so many of these claims have already been debunked, it seems like, and experts have told me this as well, that these claims are more designed to sow doubts in the election process throughout the country, and mostly to stir up skepticism in voting procedures and how election officials are handling the current election.
Abby, thank you for breaking that down. So the Republican National Committee is filing these lawsuits. That organization is now run by Laura Trump. Do these lawsuits give us any signal that the Republican Party is almost completely dictated by what the desires of Donald Trump are?
Totally. So Donald Trump pushed for the old leader of the RNC, Ronna McDaniel, to be pushed out because he said that she didn't seem to care about election integrity enough. So he brought in Laura Trump, his daughter-in-law, because he wants her to focus more on election integrity. And that's what these 78-plus lawsuits that the RNC says it's involved in, that's what these lawsuits are about. They're about purportedly making sure the elections are secure, but they haven't really been able to prove that there's anything wrong with any of the processes that they're bringing claims about. The cases keep getting dismissed, even sometimes by Trump-appointed judges.
And what kinds of consequences are these legal challenges having on our democracy? You talked about it just a little bit when you said this is sowing doubts and sowing all type of fear and different things like that. So what are some of those other consequences?
So that Tills case I talked about, the public interest legal foundation case that was previously brought in Michigan with similar allegations that there are dead people on the voter rolls, that group made those allegations a couple weeks before the 2020 election. And in dismissing that case, a federal judge in March wrote that was one of the factors that case was one of the factors that led to the Michigan Bureau of Elections receiving bomb threats, receiving violent threats via phone and email. The Bureau had to shut down their phone lines, and election officials had to meet in undisclosed locations because when groups are filing lawsuits alleging that there's something going awry, that makes people think that election officials are wronging them. And in that case, in 2020, it led to election threats of violence. And now you have the legitimacy of the RNC behind similar claims. So I believe the threats of violence or aggression might be even stronger this year when you add the fact that a major national political party is bringing these allegations against state election procedures.
Right now, we're chatting with Abby Fasoulis, a reporter for Mother Jones. She recently wrote a piece about how Republicans are trying to invalidate the upcoming election in an article titled "The GOP's Secret Weapon for 2024? Bogus Lawsuits." Now, you talked just a little bit about it. So are clerks more afraid of potential attacks on their lives?
Definitely. I've spoken to clerks both in Michigan and Nevada where a very similar lawsuit has been filed about potentially dead voters on voter rolls. And both of these clerks expressed to me that people have come into their offices yelling at them, convinced that the voter rolls are incorrect. In Nevada, actually, the clerk that I spoke to is an elected Republican official. And she says that people are calling her and yelling at her, but they can't point to what is actually wrong because there are no actual names that are proven to be wrong on these voter rolls. But again, it's just the sowing of doubts that is leading individual voters to act as vigilantes and go to the offices of election officials and claim malfeasance.
So you did speak with Michigan clerk out of Ingham County, Byram, for the piece. What is it she experiencing on the day-to-day? How much do these lawsuits slow her down in her daily job?
So in Michigan, county clerks have a lot of different responsibilities. They are issuing marriage licenses. They are dealing with licenses for guns. And then they, of course, have their election duties that in a normal election year, add to their responsibilities. But when you bring in these claims that something is wrong, then now you have random voters who are routinely emailing her or coming into the office saying that there's voters that are incorrectly on the rolls that her office then needs to investigate. And multiple times over the last several months, she's gotten phone calls and emails with the same exact names of voters that these people for some reason think are incorrectly on the rolls. So now she and her staff are investigating those names and finding that she confirmed to me that none of the names that were emailed or phoned into her had death certificates. So they were not, in fact, dead. But she had to spend her time and resources to look into those claims. And that's time and resources that she would otherwise be spending on making sure that there's enough communication about the elections, that her office is as ready as it can be for all of the work they have to do in November.
Now, Abby, there's been a change in Trump's tactics. He's promoting people to vote from home and vote early. How does that square with what the RNC is doing to try and purge more people from the rolls? So what do you think voters make of these mixed signals?
Yeah, so one of the buckets that I mentioned of these lawsuits that the RNC is filing is about the voter rolls. But another bucket of lawsuits is challenging deadlines for absentee or mail-in voting. So they have several lawsuits in multiple different states arguing that states should not accept absentee ballots that come a couple days after the election. Now, these are ballots that were postmarked before Election Day, but through regular postal delays arrived 2 to 5 days after the election. And the RNC is trying to claim in these lawsuits that any of those votes that were postmarked by Election Day but received after Election Day by election officials, that those, in their words, dilute the legitimate votes of other voters. That is contradictory to Trump telling people that people in his party, Republicans, should vote by mail. But I think the calculus here is that they're saying that, if Democrats are going to vote by mail, then we should do that too. But they still believe that disproportionately absentee ballots will be from Democrats. So they're really just trying to, I think, make sure that they're attacking as many voting methods as they can to stir up as much doubt in the electoral process as possible.
Abby Vasulis, a reporter for Mother Jones, she recently wrote a piece about how Republicans are trying to invalidate the upcoming election in an article titled "The GOP's Secret Weapon for 2024, Bogus Lawsuits." Abby, thank you so much for breaking that down and giving us a little bit more clarity of what's happening.
Thank you.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. Today, expect a chance of showers with temperatures reaching 84 degrees. Wednesday and Thursday, partly cloudy skies with a chance of thunderstorms in the afternoon and highs in the upper 80s. Friday, expect more thunderstorms, a high of 81.
Coming up, school's out for summer, but how many students might not show up when class is back in session? We'll talk about the crisis of chronic absenteeism in Michigan schools and what should be done to fix the problem.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham, and I am joined by Chalkbeat Detroit reporter Robin Vincent. Robin, welcome to the Metro. Thank you so much for being here with us this week and, just learning from you, learning from the way you speak on air. Your voice is absolutely beautiful.
Tia, I am learning from you. If only people could see how many balls you're juggling and how good you are behind the scenes, just keeping it all together. I'm I'm so impressed.
And thank you, number one. But just listening to you and the way you question and the way you ask questions, I want to know why you got into journalism.
Okay, so we're going to have to take this show down a sentimental road, huh?
Here we go.
My parents. Yeah. I would have to throw it back to my parents. They both taught me from a young age that I needed to figure out what my talents and skills were, and I needed to use them to be a voice for the unheard, right? Because everybody's got a voice. It's just that some folks' voices are not being heard. And that was something that they really emphasized to me. My father was an Iraqi immigrant, and he came to this country and built a law practice. And then when the U.S. invaded Iraq, he started doing a lot of humanitarian efforts there. And my mom was a counselor and a teacher, so they were both helping people a lot. And I was trying to be a good writer. That took some time, but
You're here. You've made it.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe we'll see. But yeah, as I started to cultivate my skills a little bit more, I was like, okay, how can I put these skills to use in doing what they've told me I need to do, which is, figure out how to lift up other people and lift up those unheard voices.
I was going to say you found your path to do exactly what your parents taught you to do, helping other people in your own special way. So, Robin, thank you so much once again for being here, sharing that beautiful story about why you got into journalism, and you have a conversation for us.
I sure do. We're going to talk about chronic absenteeism, and we want to really demystify what this is. It's really one of the biggest problems hurting students in Detroit and nationwide. And this means students who are missing at least 10% of school days. And the number of kids missing this amount of time, it's pretty high. In Michigan, about 30% of kids are consistently absent. And those missed days, they make it hard for kids to succeed in the classroom. It also makes a teacher's job a lot tougher. I mean, not like they have jobs that are really hard or anything.
I know, yeah. They don't.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. Sure, it's real smooth sailing. Chronic absenteeism is made worse by a whole host of other issues, especially in places like Detroit. So, how should schools go about solving the problem? Are the schools alone in their responsibility to fix this? And what might lawmakers need to do to intervene? These are the questions that we are asking as education reporters. And right now I want to bring someone into the conversation with a deep knowledge of Michigan education. Lori Higgins is the bureau chief for Chalkbeat Detroit. She's covered Michigan education for nearly 25 years, and she also happens to be my boss. Lori Higgins, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much, Robin, and thank you for having me.
So, Lori, from your perch covering Michigan education for the last few decades, how long has chronic absenteeism been a problem, and do you think it's getting worse?
It's definitely getting worse. It has been a problem for probably as long as I've been here. I think that we have paid more attention to it in probably the last decade. And when I say it's getting worse, the numbers have actually gone down, both in Michigan and in Detroit, but they're still relatively high. You still have, in Detroit, 66% of the kids who are chronically absent, and a third of the kids across the state who are chronically absent. And the state numbers are well above what they were before the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic had an impact on chronic absenteeism, and schools are still trying to recover from it, but it is a very serious critical issue in Michigan schools.
Lori, did you say 66% of kids in Detroit are chronically absent?
66% of students who attend DPSCD, that's the school district, the Detroit Public Schools Community District. Across the city, if you factor in all the charter schools, the number is about 58%.
Wow.
Which is still pretty high, and it indicates that there are quite a few charter schools that have rates well above the district rates.
Okay. And then meanwhile, statewide, we're looking at roughly 30%. So we're talking about a huge chunk of students. Lori, I'd like to play a clip from a researcher at Wayne State who we both know. Her name is Sarah Lenhoff. She's been studying chronic absenteeism in Detroit for nearly a decade.
Schools, for the most part, are not adequately funded and supported to solve a problem like chronic absence that's largely coming from these outside of school problems and it related to social inequality, right? So we have this social inequality and we ask schools to solve it, but they're not equipped to solve it. We don't fund them to solve it. And then we call them failures when they can't solve it.
Lori, to that end, I wonder if you could talk about some of the ways in which poverty and racism are deepening this problem of chronic absenteeism and really making it worse.
Our reporting has shown that poverty is a critical factor in chronic absenteeism. And our reporting has really shattered a lot of myths about chronic absenteeism. I think that the common thought is that, well, these kids just don't want to come to school, or their parents just don't care or don't value education enough. But we know that issues such as stable housing, transportation, safe neighborhoods, these are really key to the reasons why kids aren't coming to school. And I can give you a couple of examples. We talked to a student who, in Detroit, students have to take the city transportation to get to high school. If you are going to a school that's not in your neighborhood, it can be very difficult to have stable transportation to and from school. Buses pass kids by. They don't show up on time. We talked to a student who said one day it was really cold in the morning. He was waiting at the bus stop around 6 a.m., and the bus just drove right past him. And so what did he do? He went right back home. He said, we're going to wait here another 45 minutes for another bus. And that's just how easy it is for a kid to become chronically absent, is that split-second decision that I'm not going to school today because the transportation was not reliable. It didn't pick me up on time. And then we have a parent who lives in a neighborhood where she does not feel safe having her child walk to school by herself. She lives in the neighborhood that's relatively rough. A lot of abandoned homes, and the walk to school is only about 5 or 6 blocks, but her daughter has to pass a lot of these, abandoned buildings in order to get to school. And as a parent, sometimes she can't walk her child to school, and so when that can't happen, she doesn't go to school. And when we interviewed this particular parent, her daughter had racked up about 50 absences, and this was before the first half of the school year.
Wow. Thank you for highlighting that, Lori, because when we talk about the rebirth of Detroit, we know that a lot of neighborhoods have been left behind, and these are some of the consequences that we're seeing of that. Can you talk about the impacts of chronic absenteeism, because they stretch pretty far and wide, don't they?
Sure, absolutely. You think about a district like Detroit, which is well known for having, some of the worst scores on a very rigorous national exam. There are a lot of efforts to improve education, improve academic outcomes for students in the district. But none of those efforts will really be effective if kids are not in school every day. It's really that simple. The ramifications just continue to reverberate, because if kids aren't coming to school, they're not learning. If they're not learning, they're not going to be prepared for life after school. They're going to be more likely to drop out of school. They're going to be more likely to have continued academic challenges. And so unless schools and communities, and that second part is really important, unless schools and communities can work together to address some of the issues that schools cannot solve alone, this issue will continue to affect the ability of districts like Detroit, communities like Detroit, even states to improve academic outcomes for kids.
We're speaking with Lori Higgins, Bureau Chief for Chalkbeat Detroit, about the crisis of kids missing too much school and what can be done about it. Lori, with the gravity of this, it's kind of surprising to some of us anyway, that lawmakers don't seem to have much of a grasp on this issue. Could you talk about that?
Sure. It's a really surprising situation for me because I think that this is probably one of the most critical issues facing schools, and yet you don't see lawmakers talking about this at all. I covered an education committee hearing in the House or the Senate a few months ago, and Superintendent Nikolai Vitti from Detroit was there to talk about a bill, and he was making an argument about how we need to make kindergarten mandatory in Michigan because that would send a message to parents. And he threw out some statistics showing that 70+% of the kids in the early grades in Detroit are chronically absent. And the lawmakers were shocked. They were hearing this information, it seemed like, for the first time, even though this has been a problem for years. And even then, you didn't have lawmakers jumping up and saying, okay, we need to do something about this. As far as I know, there's been no legislation enacted to address chronic absenteeism. The most recent I could think of is a bill, now a law, that provided penalties for families whose children were chronically absent, but it didn't address the root cause of chronic absenteeism or any solutions. And penalties, by the way, don't really improve chronic absenteeism. They can actually make it worse. And in Michigan's case, we are now taking away public assistance from families whose kids are chronically absent, which just exacerbates the problem, the poverty that these families are experiencing that is relating or that is producing the chronic absenteeism.
Okay, so we're going down the wrong path. What do you see as some potential viable solutions?
Well, one, I think there has to be an acknowledgement from everyone that this is not just a school district issue. Schools cannot solve this issue alone. They cannot fix all of the societal problems that are leading to chronic absenteeism. And that makes it really critical for schools and communities to be working together to find solutions to chronic absenteeism. Otherwise, you'll just have schools doing what they can do within the school to address chronic absenteeism. And that may work for some kids, but it's not going to work for all kids. I'm thinking about a recent story I read about in Oakland, California. They started paying chronically absent students to come to school. Essentially, kids are getting like $50 every week if they show up every day. Wow. So it's great for those kids who are motivated by the money, but in a lot of cases, having money is not necessarily going to draw kids to school. It doesn't fix the underlying issues of why kids aren't coming to school. A lot of schools have invested in attendance officers or attendance agents. That is an in-school effort. It does not necessarily, it will improve it. And we've seen that in Detroit. We spent a fair amount of time at Gompers Elementary Middle School last year, where the attendance agent was this fantastic woman who was able to create connections with families and get kids coming to school on a more regular basis. But again, that is one solution, and it doesn't address the overall community problem of chronic absenteeism.
So, Lori, knowing all of this, Chalkbeat Detroit is involved in some community engagement efforts to try and raise awareness about chronic absenteeism. Could you talk about those?
Sure. Yeah, we'll be out in the next few weeks canvassing around the city, sharing some really important information about chronic absenteeism. One thing that we know is that, or a few things we know. One, parents don't always understand what chronic absenteeism means or what its implications are. And they don't understand the, what the challenges are when their kids are missing too much school. And we also know that parents aren't necessarily seeking out information about this. And so we've put together a guide on chronic absenteeism, providing answers to questions that families may have or should have about chronic absenteeism. And we've now produced a brochure that we're going to be handing out all over the community, because we don't want to rely on people coming to our website to read this information. We need to give it to them. There's an information gap here, clearly. And we want to be sure that families have the information that they need to make better decisions, or to make the right decisions for, their kids.
That's right. That's right. Lori Higgins, thank you for your work and your leadership. Lori is the bureau chief at Chalkbeat Detroit, the nonprofit news outlet where I also happen to work. We're focused on covering Detroit schools, Michigan education policy, and more from a lens of equity. Lori, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up, Kamala Harris's campaign for president has been running hot. In the next segment, we'll hear about who Harris is and a little about her political background. You all stay right there. It's the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham grooving.
I'm grooving
with who am I grooving with?
You're grooving with Robin Vincent. I'm grooving right here with you. Yes, Tia Graham. Excitement around Kamala Harris's campaign has been bubbling. The vice president's favorability rating jumped from 35 to 43% just over the past week. That's according to an ABC News Ipsos poll. Her support, specifically among independents, is up 16 points. So this is a new trend. After becoming vice president, not that much was known about Harris, and views of her among the American public, they kind of began to sour. Why was that? And what are the things Harris is planning now to become more popular among Americans? Last week, WDET's Carrie Jr. II asked these questions to reporter Elena Plott Calabro, who did extensive coverage of the vice president for The Atlantic. Elena began this conversation on Created Equal by discussing Kamala Harris's rise in politics.
Kamala Harris is a pretty guarded politician, and I think that makes a lot of sense when you think about where she started her career. She didn't start as sort of a stump speech politician. She was a prosecutor first in Alameda County, and then the district attorney in San Francisco, then attorney general in California. So if you think about your own district attorney, it's not the sort of person that you're looking to for warm and fuzzy, soaring speeches about democracy or anything like that. It's very black and white. It's very data driven. That's what politics was for her. And so now that she's been on the national stage, I think a huge transition for her has been into sort of those gauzier elements that we expect as voters from our national leaders. Mm-hmm. So as I spent a lot of time with her on the campaign trail, it took a great deal of time before I felt I was able to get kind of past the surface with her. Finally, in our third interview, we sat down in the vice president's residence. And once she was in her own territory, you really saw her finally let her guard down a bit. And I found her to be almost maternal, Carrie. I mean, at one point, she looks at me and she says, "So you're newly married?" And it wasn't a question. And I had not told her this, but I just said, "Well, yes, Madam Vice President, I am." And she said, "Pay attention to your marriage, your relationships, because life has a way of sweeping you up." And I just thought it was a really powerful moment that you don't experience often, as I'm sure you know, as a journalist with a politician. But I guess I just want to emphasize, it really took time to get there with her. And so when I hear voters, report on the trail and they say to me, "She just doesn't seem authentic. I don't really know what she's about." That is something she's had to overcome and try to give voters more of that instant sense of connection in a way that somebody like, say, Bill Clinton or Barack Obama were able to.
I'm always reminded by the saying that you want to sit down and have a beer with your potential leader, whether a governor or a president. And it seems like that's always kind of been our barrier with Vice President Harris. Did she say anything? Did you ask her, I guess, about that and why it is she may appear to be guarded in that way? Is it purely her profession, or is there something else that she knows she's trying to make sure she's fitting into this role and doing her job the way she needs to do it?
So one thing she said to me, which I thought was interesting, was my career has not been about giving lovely speeches. It's been about doing the work.
Execution.
Exactly. And so, but where I think that gets, complicated is that a lot of the ball game as a national politician is a lovely speech. And even if you are doing the work, however excellently behind the scenes, if you can't necessarily communicate that in a compelling way to a broad swath of Americans, it almost doesn't matter as much. You need Americans to hear what you're doing. But so much of her career has been behind the scenes. I mean, I remember talking to one of her communications directors from her time as district attorney of San Francisco. And she said, even then, Kamala Harris would win a tremendous case, that she had just really done a beautiful job. And she would say, let's get this in the press. Let's get you out there and talk about this. And she'd say, I can't. I'm on the next case. I'm busy. And so that does matter a little bit less in those offices where the people are closer to you and it's just more easy to see day to day what you're accomplishing. When you're as far away from the average voter as the White House, that things like communication and rhetoric do become a lot more important.
Now, is there anything in the work specifically that you think informs her ability to be a candidate for president in terms of her prosecutor or attorney general past?
Absolutely. I think that especially coming up on a debate stage is where I think Americans will really see Kamala Harris in her element. If you recall, the thing that really launched her into the national consciousness, I would say, was her questioning of Donald Trump nominees to the Supreme Court like Brett Kavanaugh, cabinet picks like Jeff Sessions. That was a moment when this was a brand new junior senator from California, and a lot of Americans said, I want to know more about this person. When she can take control of a conversation, as I've seen time and again at events, she's a very, very compelling politician. And I think especially in this truncated period of time when the campaign is going to be less about her and more about what can she convince Americans of her opponent?
Right.
That I think is just, a really useful environment for her to be in.
She's going to prosecute the case against Donald Trump, right?
Exactly. And I was talking to one of her former comms directors the other day, and they said the bumper stickers write themselves, vote for the prosecutor, not the felon. And my understanding is she really plans to lean into that message for these next 3 months.
That was WDET's Kerry Jr. II speaking with reporter Elena Plott-Calabro about the political life of Kamala Harris. You can hear episodes of Created Equal every day from 9 to 10 a.m. and 7 to 8 p.m. or stream episodes at WDET.org.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. Coming up, it's Minority Mental Health Month, and we'll hear about things people can do to improve their mental well-being. You all stay right there. Welcome back to the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I am Tia Graham, and I am joined by Robin Vincent of Chalkbeat Detroit. Robin, really loved that last conversation. I learned a lot, and it really did bring awareness to my eyes as well that we really do have an issue happening within the city of Detroit in terms of absenteeism.
We do. 66% of students in the city of Detroit going to Detroit Public Schools, community district schools, and 30% of students across the state are chronically absent.
And it's so scary.
I know. It's hurting students, and like you and I were talking about at the break, it hurts teachers who have really tough jobs already.
And the kids are coming to them, and they just have to do so much more work to get them prepared when they do finally show up to class and it's not their fault and it's just so many different things, so many different layers to that conversation. So I really look forward to following along with you in Chalkbeat Detroit to continue to learn about bringing awareness to chronic absenteeism here in the city of Detroit and state of Michigan. It's a lot.
We'll be continuing to cover it at chalkbeat.org/Detroit.
Awesome. But coming up now, it's hard to keep up with everything happening in the world, as you were just hearing, whether it's our politics or our personal life. More unique challenges are added for people of color. Not only are there ongoing societal pressures, but there's also stigma lurking internally in these spaces that often go unexplored. Tomorrow, Hegira Healthcare is hosting a virtual town hall featuring a panel discussion focused on how to reduce mental health care disparities. To talk more about the town hall and Minority Mental Health Month is Dr. Andrea Rodgers. Dr. Rodgers is the Director of Development at Higgins Health, which operates out of Metro Detroit. Dr. Rodgers, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, indeed. So what's happening tomorrow with the town hall?
So tomorrow, myself from Hegira Health and a few other mental health professionals from throughout the metropolitan area, we're going to be talking about Minority Mental Health Month, which is really to remove stigma, but also mainly to have some conversations about the advocacy needed to continue and the resiliency that is shown in minority communities as well.
And, just building off of that, why is it so important to highlight the POC mental health and just the importance of bringing awareness?
So there are several factors, including the stigma that is present, the disparities of care that is received. There's medical mistrust within BIPOC communities. There's so many areas that we need to continue to have conversations so that we can see an increase in services and availability.
And just always thinking about just personally in our own lives, in our own families, within our own cultures. What are some things that you experienced throughout your life that brought you to want to bring more awareness to mental health?
Me personally, I had the opportunity. I worked in IT for 10 years before I kind of pivoted and made this huge jump. But I saw something tragic, and it was suggested to me to get mental health services and everyone who saw this tragic event. And it never occurred to me that the event that I saw was traumatic. I was like, we see traumatic stuff all the time in the community. And it was literally in that process that I was like, wait a minute, this is not normal. Trauma is not okay. Trauma should not be normalized. And so that was kind of the beginning of my personal journey to be like, hold up, I'm in the faith-based community as well. So there's stigma about receiving outside help. There's so many areas for BIPOC communities to thrive without the resources that they need to thrive.
Yes. And just building off of that, again, just being in those spaces, how does stigma show up in the world of mental health care?
So one of the reasons that Minority Mental Health Month exists, B.B. Moore Campbell in 2008 started this initiative for Minority Mental Health Month. And one of the things that she said, she puts it so clear. She said, people in minority communities do not want just another factor held against them. There's so many factors that is held against them. People of color are valued for their productivity. And so when there's something that impedes that, there's a stigma to be like, hold up, no, I don't think I want to go that route. Mm-hmm. That's just one area.
Yeah, just that extra label per se. Yeah, so if you can go on, if we can go into it a little bit more deeply, we've been talking a lot about it, especially on the show, young men and their mental health, especially young men of color and their mental health right now. I just want to know from your experience, from what you've been doing, what have you seen with young men, especially young men of color? Do you believe that it's happening more, or are we noticing it more?
So one of my specialty areas is children and childhood services. So one of the things I want to impact is, so people ask, do minorities have more issues or more mental health? There's a caveat to that. It's not that young men of color have more issues. It's they literally are exposed to more disparaging factors that causes more exacerbating symptoms. So if I have a symptom and I get it checked early, it doesn't show up more. It's easier to treat. And so men of especially young men of color, are less likely to receive the help when it's needed. So their symptoms are exacerbated. And depending on the culture in the home for men receiving help or men, there's that stigma. Be a man.
Yep.
Don't you cry. Don't show emotions. We forget that anger is an emotion. So there's acceptable emotions, and then I could go on and on, but there's so much pressure on our young men to present a certain way that they don't get to be themselves.
Mm-hmm. Right now we're chatting with Dr. Rodgers, the Director of Development at Higira Health. We're talking about an event that's coming up tomorrow to help people manage their mental health, but also to talk about the disparities within the healthcare system. So what are you seeing within the healthcare system in terms of mental health, not just awareness, but the practice of reaching out for mental health and reaching out? What are we seeing right now in those disparities?
So one of the main things is that there are levels of medical mistrust. So if someone reaches out for help and they are discounted, their pain isn't acknowledged, their situation is kind of put to the back burner, people are less likely to reach out for services in the first place. Then when they do reach out for services, sometimes they aren't trusted, they aren't believed. They are told, they are being emotional, and people show different signs. So they're like, well, that's not what I thought mental illness looked like. And so there are so many factors that go against that. That's why just this conversation, people having it just brings hopefully some awareness and some light bulbs go off and say, you know what, I can't reach out. And if I don't reach out and they're not listening to me, I need to reach out to somebody else.
Exactly. So just looking into what Higira Health does, and you have the temporary stay services there for those who need a place to stay, temporarily, but you have that in place. You also have so many other wraparound services, whether it's art therapy, whether it's music therapy. There's so many things that you all are doing to kind of fill in those gaps that we are seeing within the healthcare system in terms of mental health, especially mental health within minority groups. So talk about the work that you're doing in order to fill those gaps and some of the things that you're seeing within the healthcare system that can also fill those gaps.
So when we talk about accessibility, Higira Health has 10 locations in the Wayne County area. However, we are able to support the metropolitan area as a whole. So we do telehealth. We do in-clinic visits. We do community visits. We do home-based visits. And so that's a myriad of services that are available. So it's not kind of a one thing hits all, or you have to get to this one place. We're spread out within the community. We have a different level of evidence-based treatment. We do mental health, substance abuse, as well as comprehensive health care.
Yes. And just once again, thinking about the town hall that you all are going to have tomorrow and the things that you all are going to talk about, what can people expect when they're attending this town hall?
So we have some wonderful experts. I'm so excited about tomorrow. We have Cassandra Phipps from Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network. We have Tracy Jackson, who is the director of intake at my side, as well as Angela Lopez from my side, and myself from Higira Health. So you have people who are in different levels of in the community, but also different levels of services. So we have the overarching from Detroit Wayne. We have individual community mental health agencies. And so we can talk from that, but we can also talk from our own personal experience, as you were asking me earlier.
Yes, and yes, indeed. I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Andrea Rodgers, the Director of Development at Higira Health. Her organization is hosting a virtual town hall event tomorrow to help people manage mental health. Dr. Rodgers, thank you so much for being here on the Metro. And once again, just having the conversation is the start.
Thank you so much.
That is the Metro for July 30th already. It's July 30th already. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. The show is also on YouTube if you like listening that way.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Additional production support from Sydney Walkley. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music by Sam Bobian and Will Sessions.
Indeed, The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and you want to support The Metro, consider becoming a member at WDET.org/donate.
This is WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening. We'll see you tomorrow.
We will see you tomorrow. And also send pitches and feedback to metro@wdet.org. We would love to hear from you all who are listeners, or maybe you're not a listener and you just tuned in today and you want to hear something special. Email us, metro@wdet.org. Robin, love working with you today. I'll see you tomorrow.
Tia, likewise. See you then.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new master's degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. More information at business.udmercy.edu.